All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story of truly unprecedented scale. We're going to explore the dramatic rise, the absolute peak, and the highly debated legacy of the British Empire. We'll be looking at exactly how a single nation expanded its reach across oceans and continents to, quite literally, change the course of world history.
Just think about the geography for a second, right? We're talking about a relatively tiny island in Western Europe that somehow managed to eventually dominate a quarter of the globe. Through a complex web of trade, exploration, and sheer military power, they expanded way beyond their shores. So the big question is, how on earth did those initial maritime journeys evolve into the largest empire the world has ever seen?
To answer that, we're going to follow this roadmap. We'll start with a small island's rise, look at the foundation of its golden age, examine the engines of expansion, reach the Victorian peak, and finally, unpack its complex global legacy.
All right, Section 1, a small island's rise. We're heading back to the late 16th and early 17th centuries.
So this early maritime exploration wasn't just about, finding new sea routes. It quickly led to actual foundational British colonies. English ships were hitting the shores and setting up colonial outposts across 4 major regions: North America, the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa. The seeds of global influence? Yeah, they were firmly planted in the sand.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Golden Age Foundation, focusing on the reign of Queen Elizabeth I.
Imagine the immense pressure here. Elizabeth was only 25 years old when she took the throne in 1558. She inherited a country that was just deeply fractured by religious conflict. But instead of letting it crumble, she actually managed to restore stability by strengthening the Church of England and promoting peace at home.
And her rise? It's even more incredible when you look at her start. Born in 1533, she had a pretty tragic childhood, marked by the execution of her mother, Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth was literally declared illegitimate, yet she received an extraordinary education. Fast forward a bit, and this brilliant mind leads England to a massive historic victory. In 1588, King Philip II of Spain sent the powerful Spanish Armada, a fleet considered absolutely invincible, to invade England. Against all odds, the English Navy completely defeated them. This permanently cemented England as a major naval power during a true cultural renaissance right up until her death in 1603.
Now, she's famously remembered as the Virgin Queen, and this was a highly strategic choice. Unlike a lot of rulers back then, she chose never to marry. She figured that marrying a foreign prince would compromise and weaken English independence. But on the flip side, marrying an English noble would undoubtedly spark fierce internal drama. By remaining unmarried for her entire 44-year reign, she brilliantly protected the throne and transformed England into one of the strongest nations in Europe.
Which brings us to Section 3, Engines of Expansion, looking at trade and industry.
The East India Company underwent a truly fascinating evolution. Created in 1600, it started out strictly as a trading company, but over time, it morphed into this massive quasi-governmental force, and eventually fielded its own private army that actually outnumbered the regular British military at one point. Crazy, right? It gained total political and military power in India, locking in Britain as an unrivaled global trading nation.
And then, bam, the Industrial Revolution hits in the 18th and 19th centuries, giving Britain a totally insurmountable advantage. Factories were pumping out goods faster than humanly possible before this era, but goods are only valuable if you can actually trade them safely. That's where a potent combination comes in. Rapid factory production, backed by the unmatched protective might of the Royal Navy. This dual force allowed Britain to export its goods and project its influence onto every single continent safely and profitably.
All right, let's jump to Section 4, the Victorian peak, focusing on the architect of the Victorian era.
Much like Elizabeth, Victoria's path to the throne was pretty unexpected. She inherited the crown at just 18 years old in 1837. She married Prince Albert in 1840, forming this legendary partnership. They had 9 children, and fun fact, because so many of them married into European royal families, she actually earned the nickname the Grandmother of Europe. Her reign perfectly aligned with the explosion of the Industrial Revolution, eventually leading her to be named Empress of India in 1877.
63 years. Queen Victoria ruled for over 6 decades, longer than any British monarch before her. After the devastating death of Prince Albert in 1861, she wore black mourning clothes for the rest of her life, which, by the way, single-handedly drove global fashion trends. Despite this personal tragedy, she remained a rock-solid symbol of immense stability for the British people right up until she died in 1901.
Now, to put things into perspective, the sheer, mind-boggling scale of this peak is hard to overstate. By the late 19th and early 20th century, the British Empire ruled nearly 1/4 of the entire world's land and population. We're talking territories across Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, vast parts of Africa, the Caribbean and beyond. Literally 1 in 4 people on Earth lived under British rule.
You've definitely heard the famous phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire." But here's the thing. This wasn't just some poetic bragging. It was a literal geographic fact. The territories were so incredibly vast, spanning so many different time zones, that it was always daytime somewhere within its borders.
Which leads us into Section 5, a complex global legacy, exploring both its influence and controversy.
As an explainer, our goal here is to impartially present what the historical sources actually document. Looking at it objectively, we see 2 distinct sides. On one hand, there's an undeniable developmental footprint. The empire built extensive global infrastructure, massive ports, schools, and enduring legal systems. But on the other hand, historians clearly point out that this era is deeply defined by severe conflicts, undeniable economic exploitation, and the tragic stripping of local independence from native populations. So the British Empire is remembered globally as both deeply influential and highly controversial.
Ultimately, maintaining that massive scale was completely unsustainable. Following the global upheaval of the Second World War, the empire began a rapid decline. Colonies across the world passionately sought and fought for their independence. A massive catalyst for this occurred in 1947, when India officially gained its independence. Over the following decades, a domino effect happened. Many other nations followed suit, gaining self-rule and gradually bringing the formal British Empire to an end.
But, those centuries of connections didn't just vanish into thin air. Today, most of those former territories are fully independent nations. However, many of them maintain a modern connection through the Commonwealth. Essentially, this is a voluntary international organization designed to promote cooperation, trade, and shared values between independent countries that share those deep historical ties to Britain.
Which brings us to our final thought. The British Empire fundamentally changed the course of world history. Even though the empire itself has vanished, its echoes, they're everywhere. Its influence still dictates the global prevalence of the English language, the structure of legal and educational systems, and political frameworks across huge parts of the world. So, as you look around at our deeply interconnected modern society, I want to leave you with this. How does the complex, controversial, and monumental legacy of this small island nation still shape the very world you live in today? Something to think about. Keep exploring, and thanks for